It's time for PaleoRadio, only on Secular Media Network.
You are now entering PaleoRadio.
Welcome to PaleoRadio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to PaleoRadio. My name is Joe Elder.
I'm the Tower of Power, Jeremiah Bannister.
And this is episode 30. How fantastic is that?
It's amazing, dude. I was thinking about that recently and saying, it felt like just literally last week that it was episode 29.
Yeah, and to our followers on Facebook, to our followers on Twitter, the people who have supported us on Patreon.com, thank you so much. 30 is a very, very low number compared to the amount that we're going to have by the time it's all said and done.
It's going to be like a gazillion.
A gazillion bajillions.
We're going to be old and wrinkly and crotchety.
Yes. And still talking about the same
right.
junk.
Still the same stuff. You had an awesome weekend, didn't you?
I did. I ended up participating in Laugh Fest for the first of 2 weeks that I'm going to be involved in. Did a little bit of stand-up at Sunday Night Funnies last Sunday.
Sounds so awesome.
Oh, it was a delight. I also auctioned off $50 worth of elder beef, which was pretty great. So that was all raised for Gilda's Laugh Fest. That's a donation for Gilda's Club, which is what helps to finance Laugh Fest coming to Grand Rapids every year.
And we ended up launching TeamTinyDancer.com.
Yes.
And so you can go and check it out. And listen, you have to, because the bio page is absolutely adorable. It's hilarious, too. But every single member of the family, including Lion, our cat, and Coco, our St. Bernard, we all have bios. And it's awesome.
How awesome is that? Speaking of awesome, we have some really great segments coming up here. We're going to start off with the obvious one, the rally that happened or didn't happen for Donald Trump in Chicago.
It was crazy.
And there's a lot of implications to that, and we're going to kind of expound on it.
And then we're going to be talking about the whole idea of prayer instead of medical care and something that happened in Idaho.
That's very hotly debated. That's going to be a great topic. After that, we're going to be moving on to iPhones and the relationship with the government and how they're using a different strategy to crack iPhones.
And then we're going to finish off with why privatizing the VA healthcare system is a bad idea. It's going to be fun to discuss and debate. Some good points, but we'll have fun with it.
Yeah, the VA is always one that we love to get into. So, all right, getting right into the first topic. This is an article from fightbacknews.org, How Students in Chicago Organized to Shut Down Trump by Joe Yosbaker. That's an absolute attempt, but I believe that's correct.
We're hoping it's right.
If not, then correct us and we will redact that thing. Okay, the announcement of Donald Trump's visit to the University of Illinois at Chicago came 1 week before his scheduled March 11th appearance. Within minutes, there was a Facebook page announcing plans to protest. There was also a MoveOn.org petition calling the administration at UIC to cancel the rally. By later that afternoon, over 5,000 people signed up to protest, and by later that night, 50,000 had signed the petition. So that's a lot of activism there.
It's a whole lot of it, and you got MoveOn showing up, for sure. But the idea, and listen, you kind of get an idea for what's going on, the context leading up to this, when it said the petition calling on the administration to cancel the rally. So to cancel, so this is kind of the context leading up to that it involves different groups, including MoveOn, including a petition to cancel the rally.
And I know I will probably catch some guff for this, but the idea of telling someone that they can't come to the whole entire event or wanting to shut down the whole event, I'm really not entirely for it. I don't think that college campuses need to be coddled with bad ideas. I think people can be allowed to speak them, but you can argue them down too, so I have kind of a unique position on that. But I don't believe in the PC culture of just shutting down every opposing person that's coming to the university.
What's the threshold for petitions for the president to look at them? 50,000.
Yeah.
So you had enough people.
Yeah,
you had enough people to sign it, right?
Yeah. That's impressive. Planning the actions. The students agreed to support two sets of tactics, one inside the Trump event and one outside. It became clear within the meeting that the main drama would be the protest taking place to disrupt Trump's speech. Mm-hmm. Cassie Robledo was going in. Usama Ibrahim of the Muslim Students Association intended to go in as well. Communications were set up, including the use of the app Signal, which allows for encrypted communication. A plan was hatched for the groups planning to disrupt to be organically developed and then coordinated by dividing up the period of the Trump rally into 10-minute intervals. So every 10 minutes there was sequential
There was going to be
interruption.
disruption, right.
Yeah. The tactics for the mass march and rallies outside the Trump event venue were debated during the meeting. Given that the protest was only 4 days away, there was an emergency character to the planning. There was tension in the room. But after a wide-ranging debate in which more than one-third expressed their views, the organizers were able to present a plan which united the room.
There's been a real backlash, it seems, against the idea that anyone, even within the activist community or outside, can criticize that kind of a thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on the criticism here, because if it's the college students organizing it, this is someone coming to the college campus. If it's influenced by people that are outside of the college that actually influence presidential bids or something like that, like we look at MoveOn.org, I mean, they get some funding.
Look at the optics.
Look at the optics.
I mean, if you look at the optics, the screenshots, and they were fascinating. It was riveting to watch. It looked like Occupy. I mean, it kind of was, exactly. To have something of that magnitude, you are going to have, at least, and I called it before it was even released by, what was it, People for Bernie, Voices for Bernie, something like that it took over 12, this wasn't by luck. That was their tweet. It wasn't by luck, but that it took the coordination of over a dozen different groups for this to be done. You could see that in the optics.
Yeah, I think you could see that. I also think that there's criticism to go on to people doing that, but I also think that when you have somebody who uses separatist language as their platform, which is Donald Trump's, and we don't want to necessarily go out there and say he's an overt racist or anything like that. I don't know. I don't really think that he is. I think he's an ignorantly racist man, to be honest, but that's my own opinion. But I can say that he's exclusionary, and that's part of his MO, is he's exclusionary. Free speech doesn't necessarily mean inconsequential speech. So the right for him to say things is equal. The right for people to want to go in there and overtly protest the things he says, I think, is equal ground too. And I don't know. I think what makes it unique is when you get onto college campuses where people sell that place as a place that's your home and that's your backyard, and you're used to going into these areas. I think that it's that fine line, right? I don't think that you can kick somebody out for going, but I think you could go in there and have dialogue.
Yeah.
I think
and
it
if
just
they were
depends.
all students.
Yes.
If they were all students who went in there and disrupted by going in and doing kind of a flash mob protest, I think that would be one thing, but they weren't all students.
Yeah, and you're right. We don't really know. We don't know who went in and who went out. It could have been predominantly college students. It could have been people that were just protesters that drove quite a lengthy ways to protest Donald Trump.
And we know all of that happened. It was a mixture of things on the inside and the outside. What are your thoughts about protesting inside of events, shutting things down, pulling fire alarms, however you want to play it, or the flash mob technique that was done?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's two different arguments. One is protesting inside if you're doing it without interrupting the speech, but it's a non-violent, silent protest, but you're someone who bought a ticket and you walked in there and you held up a sign in there. I totally would agree with that. I think there's nothing wrong with it. And I don't even think you're being that much of a provocateur. If you're interrupting the speech, I think it's only a matter of time. For instance, hey, we covered the Black Lives Matter issues with Bernie Sanders, right? And when we did it, even for right or for wrong reasons, I still defend the position that I don't know if he correctly did the right thing by letting himself get interrupted twice, and on the second time giving the people more of a platform. Now, I was wrong in the assumption that other groups are going to do it, but I'm surprised they haven't. Because if the idea is that you can hijack a 5,000-person crowd to speak your point, people are going to do that.
And how easy would it be once people, admittedly in the majority, that are enjoying things like privilege, like white privilege, realize, you know what, you've initiated an arms race. I'm going to go back. And how often are those people going to get in trouble? And how often will it escalate to violence without them getting into trouble?
Yeah, oh yeah. And one thing that I wrote down that I think is the most important whenever there's situations like this is I wrote media, and I put the system in parentheses, but media and the system, just the systemic nature of things, knows exactly how to handle unruly protesters. It doesn't have a good way of dealing with sit-ins, boycotts, or nonviolent protests. I don't think it was the best tactic, but I understand it. So I do. I understand the idea, but the media knows how to play with you when they have violent clips of people. That's all I have to say about it, in the sense of if we're playing a propaganda war, which all political wars are, you're trying to have the least amount of negative propaganda you can, and you get more of it by having photos of people silently standing with signs. Or what if everybody walked in the room, all 70 of them, and chose to sit?
I responded to someone I respect, a colleague of mine, and I said this. I said, it's really as simple as this. I absolutely reject the notion that any activist, group, or network, that they get a blank check on tactical matters. Pure and simple. Groups have the right to talk secretly, to coordinate events behind closed doors. But people outside of that decision-making process have every right, even the responsibility, to respond and to criticize, especially if they disagree with inaction on tactical or even philosophical grounds. And listen, lest I totally forget, Bernie Sanders, and this is the whole debate, is that what I said about whether or not Bernie should notify his more fervent and robust supporters and simply tell them that he doesn't believe that they should go in and protest inside of events. Lo and behold, unsurprising to me, it's exactly what he did. He did it on a Sunday show, came out and said, of course I don't believe you should go in and interrupt other people's events, because I know for a fact he wouldn't want it done to his own. Plus, he doesn't want to be responsible for the arms race. It's that simple. It's the right thing to do, and I'm interested to see how the Bernie supporters are if they're going to change their mind after this.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I think that it matters. To be honest, I go back and forth every time, because we talk about things like the arms race, right? Well, did the liberal left start the arms race when we know that whether they did this or not, we'd see consistent violence at Trump rallies? It's an interesting question. It's something that I'm still wrestling with.
I'd kick out disruptors, not going to lie. We'll be right back right after this, everybody. Going to be a bunch of fun talking about faith healing. Don't go anywhere.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/PaleoRadio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
It's happy, fun follower time, Jeremiah.
It is. We have a whole bunch of different people who follow this show.
Let me give you 2 examples, okay?
Yeah.
First one is Jason Roach. He's a freelance musician extraordinaire, amateur philosopher, sentient being, recovering victim of hereditary religiosity. It's pretty deep.
Yeah.
And then we also have T-Will. That's at FatWill56.
Fat Will.
A bikes, boobs, and booze-loving secular atheist. There are no gods, so get busy living or get busy dying. 18 and over.
He ain't wasting no time. Pedal to the metal kind of guy.
Thank you both for the follow.
All right, speaking of pedal to the metal, let's get going. Here's the article, Prayer Instead of Medical Care in Idaho. This is by KTVB.com. Number 1 for Idaho news and weather. Had to get in there. Parenthetical. All right, Boise. A clause in an Idaho law protects parents from being prosecuted if they choose not to bring their child to a doctor and they end up dying from a treatable illness. Only 5 other states have such a religious exemption.
Right off the bat, I have one question. What about parents that think somebody has like a common rash or something and they ended up dying of it, but there was no religious involvement whatsoever? Is this law to protect them? Like someone who dies of staph, right? People get rashes, particularly in baseball. People have died of staph infection. They just think it's a regular scrape.
So is that law meant to protect them?
I only asked the question.
I think this is uniquely religious thing here.
Yeah, in that case, it's crap.
Yeah. Former member of the Followers of Christ, Linda Martin, walked with KTVB's Tammy Tremblay around Peaceful Valley Cemetery. And I wish I could see a picture of this cemetery. But, quote, there's just so many of them out here. You look around and it's like, where do you start and where do you end?
That honestly, that is heartbreaking.
It's terrible.
That is crazy.
To look around and to see this. They talked about faith healing and name it, claim it, Pentecostalism. And listen, man, I grew up surrounded by that stuff. I mean, that's just that's part of my whole story, and I do lectures on this and presentations. But at the same time, it's like some of this kind of hit home to me. You know, I knew somebody I was prophesied over in a really wild frenzy of a revival. It was really powerful and interesting at the time, but prophesied over that I was going to marry the girl who was standing next to me, and we took it pretty seriously at the time, considered the ramifications of what it meant for our belief system if we denied this prophecy from someone we knew. So we got into a relationship, and we had some conversations about this because she and her family were really hardcore about it. I mean, and by hardcore, I mean pleading the blood over pictures of a car that they wanted to get for their daughter. And there's a story that goes with this. I'm not going to divulge all the details. It would be embarrassing, to be honest. It really
crazy.
would be. But to talk to somebody and have a conversation and say, if we had a child, let's say we had a daughter, and our daughter broke her leg playing soccer or something, would you bring her to the hospital? And there was this awkward pause. I mean, it really was like I was expecting something. And she said no, that she would get out her Bible and her verses, and she would begin pleading the blood over it and speaking out at it in faith.
Can't that be violating the health and safety of the child?
That's why it was done. Like, that's why prophecy be damned. I'm really sorry, but I'm a kid person. I'm an individual who doesn't like the idea of watching somebody limp around because their leg was hurt. And I use that example with her because there was somebody in the school, in fact, or in the church that, while playing high school sports, I believe soccer, hurt her leg very badly and was limping around inside the church. And when the pastor came up and said, "Hey, do you think you might need to go to the doctor?" the mom raced around the corner and condemned him and said, "You know what? Get behind me, Satan." Pulled that kind of talk to the pastor. It was a wild scenario, but these are just examples, and I've got just candy bags full of them. But I do. So I've got a ton of them, but this is a real thing, and kids that are brought up in this, that's a real problem, Joe.
Oh, it is, and it is the response that I usually give people when they say that religion doesn't hurt anybody. At a certain point, this is probably going to hurt a few feelings here, but playing pretend is over when someone can get hurt. You know, and it was that way when we were kids in the treehouse, and that's that way now when we're adults. And when we're talking about praying to things that don't practically solve the problem, and we're not going to seek the medical attention, I mean, that is out and out incorrect. And I think it's a perfect dial on asking the country what they value more. Do you value child safety more? Do you value kowtowing to religious ignorance? And the answer is a lot of places want to kowtow to religious ignorance.
Well, Idaho is exactly that. And this is as read. I mentioned earlier in the segment here how I wish I had the wording, and it bada boom, bada bing, ta-da. It's right in front of my face. As read by Senator Lee Hyder, the chairman of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, quote, "The practice of parent or guardian who chooses for his child's treatment by prayer or spiritual means alone shall not for that reason alone be considered to have violated the duty of care to such child." I mean, what else would you add to that? I guess it's like you did that, plus you also denied the reality of the situation. You're saying the same thing.
So if you're an abusive parent, if you're a religious abusive parent, no, you cannot strike your child in the leg or break it or anything like that. But if they happen to hurt themselves, you can just not treat them, and that'll let it run its course in itself. What a loophole.
KTVB was denied an interview with the followers, but Hyder has visited with them before. Quote, "I think these people try very hard to take care of their children. I don't find fault in the fact that because of their religious beliefs, we should prosecute them if a child dies. You know, it's a First Amendment right, the freedom of religion." Honestly, there are limits to this.
I mean, we're not talking about a fetus, or we're not talking about a collection of cells. This is a child.
Living, breathing child.
Yeah, child, like 8 years old could be, you know what I mean? And it's from a treatable illness. I do wonder why this little carve-out and what purpose it serves when we already tell parents in so many other ways that they have to do things regarding their children.
Yeah, we do this all the time. And not just for children, but let's just level with the fact that there's limitations on your freedom of religion. People cannot sacrifice animals or children. Those can be seen, oh, well, that's extreme. Then you're admitting that there's a line. And now it's just the debate on where that line ends. And is it blurry? Is it a hard line in the sand? You know, like, where is that? Is it debatable?
If we're going to say that it's a sacrifice, if it's a treatable disease, is that a sacrifice?
It would seem like it. I mean, what else would it be to say you are not going, you're sacrificing the ability to heal somebody and saying, I am sacrificing that and putting my faith in God and believing that this is the right way to do it. I'm not going to doubt and go to the world, which may very well help me. They know that helps. They see it all around them. But it doesn't matter.
And there's also another player in this game, Dr. Paul McPherson, who's the medical director of CARES at St. Luke's Children's Hospital. He said, if a child is permitted to die from a treatable medical illness, that starts to have some concerns in my mind. He just adds on that the statistics are alarming. According to the Idaho Registry from 2002 to 2011, of all Idahoans that died, 4% of them were children. Mm-hmm. When looking at Peaceful Valley Cemetery, the number goes up drastically to 31%.
1/3.
31%.
I mean, that's visibly obvious. It's visibly obvious that what they're doing is failing badly. It's deadly in its failure.
Oh, yeah. The proof is in the pudding there with the numbers.
How would we react in popular culture? How would I mean, seriously, if Grand Rapids all of a sudden had 31% of the people dying in town were kids, right? That idea. Holy moly, dude. I mean, it would be literally people would be coming in from all over the place trying to figure out what's wrong with us. And I look at this and say, well, we don't need to do that because we all kind of know. And we all look at each other and say, it's kind of obvious. It's the woo-doo nonsense.
Yeah, we know it is. McPherson goes on to say, we don't intend this to be a law to mandate immunizations. It would be used only if a child's death is imminent from a treatable disease, which is reasonable. I mean, I understand people that have children that are terminally ill or that are sick for extended periods of time and having different ideas. But, you know, consulting the doctor and then having your religious beliefs aside, I think that's a different game to play than absolutely just barring the medical profession entirely and our understanding of science and saying, no, this is just going to be between me and the imaginary person.
You know, I used to say when I was a Roman Catholic that the reason why this is a Protestant problem, at least within Christianity in the United States, it's consistently a Protestant problem, is because they got rid of the Deuterocanonicals, the Apocrypha, right? The in-between period, intertestamental, what Protestants call it. Because in the Bible that Protestants use, there's no place that really condemns this kind of behavior, this kind of thing. They would give them the idea that, man, that's just not wise at all. You really... And here's some instructions on how you should approach doctors and how you should view medicine. But the Deuterocanonicals for Roman Catholics does have something like that, where it talks about the high esteem that you should have doctors in and how they try to find these things out through testing. I mean, this is all in Deuterocanonicals. And I look at it and say, this is just this is an American thing. I mean, it's all over the world and expressed in different ways in different religions.
If somebody is able to be treated, it's a treatable disease in general. That's what makes us so much different because, like we were just talking about, that's a sacrifice. That's knowing that you have the answer and you have the key in your hand that you know is tried and true and it works. And you're saying, I'm electing not to use the key. I mean, if anything, that's reckless and dangerous. I really do think it's sacrificial.
Canyon County prosecuting attorney Brian Taylor wrote a letter to the governor and it said this: a religious defense of crimes against children prevents a prosecutor from intervening when necessary. It's important that parents know they have a legal duty to provide their children with the necessities of life, regardless of their religious beliefs.
And Linda Martin, who is a former member of the Followers of Christ, said, the laws have worked because it takes responsibility off the parents. If they want to take their children into a doctor, they're not being shunned by their family anymore because it's the law. This is the third generation of children I've watched die. When does it stop?
If you leave, you can't come back in. PaleoRadio will return.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
Our tweets are blowing up, Joe.
Yeah, they are.
They are.
It's been really great. Yeah, thank you guys for interacting with us on Twitter and on social media. We absolutely love it. We are online pretty much all the time.
Pretty much all the time. And listen, we throw out this kind of stuff all the time on the show. So if you want to go ahead and have your name or have your Twitter account or some tweet that you put out there, if you'd like to have it mentioned on the air, make sure to follow us at Paleo Radio Show on Twitter. But listen, man, we got something from Chris Hanna, and he's a good friend of ours. Chris Hanna is a guy with Cellar Door Skeptics.
Yep, him along with Christopher Tanner. Both of those guys are great. Very high-level, intellectual, atheist thinkers here in Grand Rapids.
And they have a really eclectic show. It's pretty cool, ranging from music reviews to book reviews to interviews to rants, and everything in between, politics, science.
They cover the whole gambit. They get into philosophical arguments as well, and heavy metal music, which is pretty kick-ass.
Totally dope. But Chris tweeted this. It was from Joe Rogan, and of course we know who Joe Rogan is.
Oh, yeah, he's one of my favorites ever.
One of your favorites ever. But Joe Rogan tweeted this. Presidential debates are a terrible way to get to know these people. They should do podcasts instead. 3 hours, live and uncensored.
Yeah, I think that's the way to get to know anybody, isn't it?
Think about that for a second. I mean, that would be totally amazing to literally say, okay, check it out. I got 3 hours with you face to face, and we're going to just go to town.
Yeah, it'd be amazing if someone could hold on for that long. It would be an amazing test of endurance if they could just go through that for that long.
Their stamina and endurance.
Yes, That's really what the whole race is about. Okay, well, there's another race going on, which is between the government and our phones. We all know about that. We're going to get into that right now with an article from Bloomberg.com. Secret memo details U.S.'s broader strategy to crack iPhones or just phones in general. This is by Michael Riley and Jordan Robertson. Silicon Valley celebrated last fall when the White House revealed it would not seek legislation forcing technology makers to install, quote, backdoors in their software. Secret listening posts where investigators could pierce the veil of secrecy on users' encrypted data, from text messages to video chats. But while the companies may have thought that this was the final word, in fact, the government was working on Plan B.
Oh, wow. Isn't that neat?
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. Like you couldn't call that from about 9 million years away.
Exactly. Yeah, because we all know a lot of times when you rule against the government, they're like, yep, you're right. We're done with this. We'll never continue it again.
Yeah, the government says, we're only going to spend this much money. And it always works out that way. It's neat how they always save it. It's hilarious.
Classy. In a secret meeting convened by the White House around Thanksgiving, senior national security officials ordered agencies across the U.S. government to find ways to counter encryption software to gain access to the most heavily protected user data on the most secure consumer devices, including Apple Inc.'s iPhone, the marquee product of one of America's most valuable companies, according to two people familiar with the decision. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely some playing going on.
Yeah, they want to go ahead, and this Plan B is to, well, if we can't get it out of them, if they're not going to willingly do it with the pressure of the media and society and all of this kind of like they're helping the terrorist accusations, if we can't do that, I mean, maybe we can pressure them in different ways. We can maybe even make a law. Some kind of a policy. It shouldn't be out of reach.
And just kind of trying out your hand, basically, is what they attempted. The approach was formalized in a confidential National Security Council decision memo, tasking government agencies with developing encryption workarounds, estimating additional budgets, and identifying laws that may need to be changed to counter what FBI Director James Comey calls going dark. Investigators being unable to access the contents of encrypted data stored on mobile devices or traveling across the internet.
Yeah, so that's a real problem.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, going dark. And listen, this is all stuff that is legitimately on the radar of anyone who's looking at security concerns. They're looking at these individuals like ISIS or with the rise of white nationalists and the like to say we need to better understand how these bad guys are communicating with each other. If and when they are, we need to find out how. And a lot of times, I mean, if you were a bad guy, wouldn't you want to use something that's just wonderfully encrypted? I heard Morning Joe say it, where he accused Apple of making a product that is ISIS's number one thing ever.
Yeah. But also that phone is still protecting your bank account, your social security number, your telephone number, your home address, everything you've ever had in there. When you order a pizza, you put in your credit card. Someone swipes your phone. They get into it. If you have that saved, they've got your credit card number, too. They're going to town.
And people are increasingly putting themselves onto that grid. I mean, literally, with the number of apps, the number of programs you can use to do your calendar, to do anything at all that involves very intimate, very close to home type stuff that you don't want anybody to have. So this is the amazing thing. This whole controversy technically has both. Both of those statements, both of those sentiments are at least valid. Those are real, those are legitimate, and they're both happening at the same time.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes the biggest kicker is there's a FISA court. In this FISA court, maybe this sounds like left field to some people, but this FISA court is basically a fast track of all warrants that come through, especially surveillance warrants that involve people's mobile phones, their telephone calls, that sort of thing. And the FISA court is the biggest problem here in an example that the government doesn't just settle for getting access to certain things. Edward Snowden showed us this, right? Edward Snowden revealed that the government bulk collects everybody's data just kind of for a rainy day because they've got the system in place to do it. That's the thing to be scared about, I think, is that every time the government makes a suggestion to the effect of, we only need it for this one thing, or we just need to get into it in this way, they're not admitting the fact that they have an entire system in place to bulk collect data, to go well beyond their means to survey everybody.
That's the whole idea. Whenever you hear them say things like, we're only looking at the bad guys. I mean, the idea that everyone is in that net, the process of weeding these things out are going to involve your technical participation.
Absolutely.
And if you don't think you're a bad guy, well, like we're in a place, and the idea, listen, just the idea that the government is only looking at people that they know for a fact are bad guys. We already know that's not true because of the way that it was already abused already in the past. And so you sit there and say it's already being abused, plus no accountability for them, making decisions about this. What is the recourse for this?
And I think John Oliver had an episode where he interviews Edward Snowden. If you guys ever get a chance, please go onto YouTube and check that out. It's fantastic. But what he says afterwards is he finds out that people aren't really interested in that, or the way to personalize public data is really to get talking about things like dick pics and how many times you've showed your naked body on your phone. And think about, that's collected. That data is stored away. Everything you've ever written on there is stored away. Now, the reason to be upset about that is it's not to say that, tomorrow everything's going to be bad for you just because that data's out there. Except for if there's anyone that wants to come around and make you look like a bad person, they have a lot of things that they can take out of context, organize it into different ways, and make you look quite possibly like a terrible person, even if you've said very minute, very fair things for 90% of everything you've ever done. I mean, think about every mad Facebook post you've ever written or comment. I mean, that's all on there.
And, I know this is going to be a risky business. It might get me in hot water, but I'm not saying anything about the nature of their cause and what they're doing and great stories that can be accumulated and the like. But it's kind of like dealing with CPS. I mean, like the idea that something could be used and misconstrued. They're not going in there to necessarily look at how awesome you are.
No.
I mean, they are in a way. Right?
But it's really to verify if you're awful or not.
To verify if you're awful. And so the idea that the average individual would say, yeah, that's perfectly fine. It's kind of the whole situation in and of itself, if you're not a problem, if you're not an issue at all, is still kind of strange. It's like, hey, you're a representative of the government. That's really interesting at my door.
One I've always loved is when everyone gives me the old line of, well, I don't care what they look through because I've got nothing to hide. I always ask them what kind of porn they like to watch. And if they have any kinky type of porn, I mean, let's go home and get on the computer and show it. Or share it on your Facebook wall. Hey, guys, this is the type of porn I like to watch. Or this is, I mean, everybody has reasons to have privacy. And it's funny because in the 1960s, or even up till the 90s almost, with Russia, we used to laugh at that country because of the way the government would survey their people, and people just shake their head. And I guess this is kind of an old school mentality of mine, but I've always grown up with the assumption that if I'm doing nothing wrong, the government has no right to be watching me. Not that I'm doing nothing wrong so they can and it's of no consequence. It's if I am committing no crime, you have no reason to be following me. You have no reason to be looking at my things. If somebody gets a warrant, hey man, have at it, do your thing. But I think again, this goes back to things like the FISA courts. That makes that such a big issue. Because they want to fast track it.
I remember before the internet, part of my life was preceded that.
Uphill both ways.
But there was a Rolodex. there were black books. And there were safes, right? The people would just, and there still are safes, and there still are Rolodex, there still are these things. But the idea that you could put them in safe places, or that it wasn't just available in this thing called cloud, or magically working with satellites, right? Like that was, and that people could intercept things, or that people could drive by outside your house and with the right technology stuff has changed literally so dramatically that I think that it's just hard, especially for older people. I think it's really hard for them to grasp the significance of what they're saying when they're saying that, well, it's only just for one device.
Yeah, they don't understand really how a backdoor works, right? And I think that that's the biggest issue. Going back into the article, backdoors refer to security holes that are intentionally inserted into software to create the equivalent of a skeleton key for law enforcement. What wiretapping systems are for telephone lines, for instance. The problem with backdoors in computer networks is that they create vulnerabilities for any hacker to find. Now, you're talking about making everything more vulnerable from not just the security of your own personal data, but cybersecurity nationally can suffer from having a skeleton key that other hackers can get a hold of that aren't necessarily from the United States.
Our national security experts, those who are engaged in cyber warfare and things like that, would love nothing more than to discover backdoors. That's like their favorite thing in the world.
Well, yeah, and that's why this premise of just give us it one time and we'll only use it one time, that's kind of the same thing as when Obama was standing up there saying, we're not collecting your data.
Right.
Yeah, to hell you weren't. Right? These type of things, especially when they are going dark, it's usually in the government's favor. When they go into the darkness, they do a lot of dirty, dirty things, and that's happened time and time again.
And the Libertarian presidential candidate, McAfee, came out and said, listen, this could be fixed. You just got to spend the money on people who might want to smoke weed while they work.
Yeah, and eat some Cheetos. Up next, guys, why privatizing the VA healthcare system is a bad idea.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact PaleoRadio Show at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
We absolutely love our listeners, and if you guys love us back, you can donate to our patreon.com/PaleoRadio account and just keep us going. Let us live the dream, please.
Yes, and we don't stress this very often, but we really ought to. I mean, we've made this decision intentionally to be funded via Patreon. And the reason for this is we want to safeguard our moral integrity and our intellectual integrity. We really do, to stay away from things like partisanship or things like commercialization. And we don't ever, for any reason, want to hesitate to praise or even to criticize anybody at any time over anything we so desire. And this is an important thing, I think, especially in a world that's completely bought. And we can't do this without you.
Absolutely. The world has changed, but it hasn't changed that much. People don't go down into the corner store and buy their newspaper anymore. They go on to podcasts and they support them through patreon.com, and they go on to Paleo Radio and do that.
And we're cheaper than your Sunday paper.
Damn right we are.
Alrighty, why privatizing the VA healthcare system is a bad idea. And I, right away from the get-go, I think you're the one who shared this with me maybe. But the idea that we've kind of come at this, we've talked about it before. I encourage people to go back and check out different shows. We've talked about this, and we've kind of taken a position, I think you and I pretty much agree all the way on this, with a gold card idea and specialization at the VA, to retain specialization in certain fields and do this. So this is the piece. It's by Suzanne Gordon. The Veterans Health Administration must fix major problems, but its integrated care system should be a model to learn from. She begins by saying this: Obamacare isn't the only program at stake in the next election. The future of the nation's largest healthcare system, the Veterans Health Administration, is also up for grabs. Republican candidates for president, some with support from the Koch brothers-funded group Concerned Veterans for America, are waging a campaign to demonize, remake, and perhaps ultimately privatize the VA. She uses a couple examples here. She points out Marco Rubio that wanted to jolt the VA back to life. Of course, his opinion at this point might even be irrelevant forever. It's true.
Yeah, get a bottle of water, Marco.
He got trounced, little did. Marco. So, but jolt the VA back to life by forcing it to compete with the private sector. But there's other Republicans who think that way. Right, I mean that's that's a relatively popular thing.
But I think forcing it to compete with the private sector isn't what they're doing here. That's the same thing as saying that charter schools are just competing with public schools, even though they want to be federally funded.
Right,
it's a different case. It's not saying that someone's going to fund the whole school, build the whole school, and do it all on their own money. They still want the federal grants. They want the money for it from the state or the federal government. They just don't want to. They want to make a profit from it, too.
Right. Donald Trump, she points out, insists that we should, quote, empower our veterans to vote with their feet, which he seems sure will take them far away from the nearest VA hospital. And let me assure her, actually, it depends on where you are, but the reason that it would take them far away from the nearest VA hospital is because for many people, the nearest VA hospital is a long ways away.
Yeah, they're few and far between. There's plenty of problems with the VA healthcare system, and honestly, I think it's because if you have ever heard the term, the worst decision is indecision, that to me is the VA healthcare. It's a kind of a half-ass attempt at being a full socialist healthcare system for people, but it's not big enough to actually hold the amount of people that need it. And it's half-assed attempting to be a privatized system while taking federal money. And both of those answers are just subpar.
Yeah, critics of the VA have done a good job, and this is a valid point, of erasing any memory of its successes from public consciousness. But there are successes, and these are right to point out, and I think that they literally bolster our case here. For example, 70 years ago, the head of the Veterans Administration signed a memorandum affiliating veterans hospitals with academic medical centers. Since that time, the VHA has become, quote, the largest single provider of medical training in the country, end quote. And that's according to the Association of American Medical Colleges. That's in part because it's government funded. And the nature of this beast, right?
Yeah.
The nature of this thing is very large. It's intentionally this way, and it's meant to service them. It's their primary care. So especially in a world where we're increasingly going off to war, we're going to find that it's going to just get bigger and bigger. That's not necessarily at all surprising, but the idea that it helped prepare over 70% of the nation's physicians, as well as members of more than 40 other healthcare professions.
It's saying that the VHA at that time was leading in kind of the thought of healthcare and was in a position to actually advance healthcare. But again, it's few and far between. Here in Michigan, how many VA hospitals are there? 3?
Not many.
3?
Very
2?
small. You got Ann Arbor, you've got Battle Creek,
Traverse City,
Detroit.
Yep.
You've got the Grand Rapids facility. But listen, the Battle Creek facility is not a hospital. And this is kind of mentioned down further. I don't want to jump too far ahead.
Yeah.
But the idea that one of the praises about the VA is that, I think it was a Rand report or something, talking about how if you have certain conditions like a heart condition, or heart failure, that the VA in general is better for it. But in Michigan, when I lived in Battle Creek, I didn't know if I was having a heart attack. And this is, in fact, the first panic attack I ever had in my life. A profound and traumatic experience. And it was very scary. Ambulance came to the house, felt that it was necessary for me to go, and I said, bring me to the VA. And they said, no way, Jose. We can't. They literally,
how about that?
They cannot bring you there. They had to bring me to the private.
Why is that?
Because they don't have certain things there. They don't have an ER. They don't have any kind of. They have a handful of nurses. They have a triage unit.
Sure.
They've got a handful of meds. After 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, they have a pharmacy that's got samples of a handful of things that they can give you. It's really difficult. But the VA, and this is powerful, VA researchers helped pioneer innovations like these. And I never knew this, actually. The shingles vaccine, the implantable cardiac pacemaker, the first liver transplant, and that benefits everybody.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
When in the correct position, but that we're so far away from that at this point. One example is, and I think the charter school example is the best way to use this, or it's the best analogy, because, again, privatizing it with a gold card system that we're talking about, that's different than saying we want to privatize the veterans home or something like that by having, instead of RNs working there, we're going to have LPNs because it's going to be a little cheaper and we want to turn a profit. The best example of that is right here in Grand Rapids, our own veterans home. This is an article out of thefreepress.com. Grand Rapids Veterans Home is still Michigan's latest outsourcing disaster. In 2011, Governor Rick Snyder's first term, the state privatized nursing assistant jobs at the Grand Rapids Home for Veterans, laying off 150 aides and outsourcing the work to the contractor J2S Group for an estimated $4 million in savings. After initial complaints about deterioration of care, a resident veteran filed suit, and the Ingham County Circuit Court judge briefly halted privatization. But the state ultimately prevailed, the Michigan Court of Appeals ruling in 2013 that the residence of the home was voluntary and that veterans were free to relocate if care wasn't up to par. And the complaints about the care continued for years.
You know, I need to know more about this, and this is really close to home. I need to know about it badly. But the idea that, well, they could have gone somewhere else is voluntary. So is treatment at the VA, technically. That's why they asked, do you have another care provider? Is this your primary? It doesn't have to be your primary. You can go somewhere else. I mean, it's kind of a voluntary thing. But the problem is a lot of the people coming back, and especially I can only imagine at an elder care home, you're talking disability type stuff.
Absolutely.
You're talking Social Security disability.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like, what am I going to do? Take my VA?
Not as many options.
Am I going to take my VA insurance out the door? I mean, maybe they've got certain kinds, but what if they're just a disabled veteran that might not happen to have the kind of insurance that they can really take many other places? In that case, it's one of those weird voluntary necessity type things. Like, it's a practical necessity due to the circumstance, but it's really voluntary if you think about it. That's how it works.
Well, and the thing, too, is privatizing healthcare is not the same as privatizing your, cement laying work on your construction project. It's not the same thing. You're talking about the quality and care of humans' lives. That takes a lot of years of experience. When you privatize that, the average years of experience for the people that work there is lower, and therefore you don't get as good enough care. I'm talking about in home health care facilities. I have experience in this because I used to work as a recruiter for home health care, so I know a great deal about it. But this J2S group at the Veterans Home in Grand Rapids just absolutely screwed the pooch. This is just a couple quick stats. They were short-staffed all year long, 121.3 staffers per day when 125.9 were required. Only 47% of required room checks were performed, and 33% of alarm checks were performed. But even worse, the home faked documentation claiming that those checks had happened. Of 10 abuse and neglect complaints reviewed by the auditor, only one was referred to the home's nursing director for investigation. After the audit was made public, Jeff Barnes, a veteran and former Snyder campaign manager who had served for the director of Michigan's Veteran Affairs Agency, resigned.
I'm basically bleeding out of my eyes and ears over here. I'm so pissed.
They faked the documentation.
For veterans.
Yeah. They
They
used surveillance to check them out. So they actually had the video surveillance showing that they were not responding to the fall checks and the alarms, but they were actually signing the documentation.
It's so outrageous.
It goes on and on again. They talk about Aramark, which is a food producer here in Michigan that pays their contractor out, and they supply the food for Michigan's prisons. This is just a unique point that I think is interesting in the article. For some folks, it's okay to dismiss maggots near food supplies or rats nibbling on the food that's intended for prisoners, food workers having sex with inmates, or smuggling in drugs, because some believe that prisoners deserve rough treatment. They're in prison, after all. You can't make that claim about veterans, especially not veterans in a nursing home.
Toward the tail end of the piece here, brought up some good points that the VA is highly integrated. Okay, so there's good things about this. For example, you can go from Boston to San Francisco and get relatively uninterrupted care. She says uninterrupted, but I went from Great Lakes all the way to Groton, and there was uninterrupted care to do with my x-rays for my cervical ribs, which resulted, of course, in 10 years of them telling me that I had no cervical ribs and I wouldn't know what they look like. That is a it's a huge disruption in care, and it's anecdotal, but it happened. Other examples would be that you can go to your primary, and that's mainly what it's about there. You can go to your primary care doctor. And then you can talk about PTSD or diabetes, But then you can walk down the hall, and they've got nutritionists there. They've got pharmacists to tell you how to take your medication properly. They've got mental health care there. All different sorts of stuff, even stuff for feet. That's a valid point. And then there was the last point here. A recent study reported that women veterans have higher rates of screening for cervical and breast cancer when they see a specially designated women's health care provider, which is what the VA is expanded to do, recognizing specialty needs for women who are in the military.
Yeah, which I think this is all great. It is an enhancement of the VA, but at the same time, our argument for the gold card, I think, is the best. That means you can seek out a women's healthcare provider that's in Michigan or wherever you live. You can go right into any of those places, and it works as a credit card going straight to the government's treasury, right to the U.S. Treasury.
It's a great article. You got to go check it out. Why Privatizing the VA Healthcare System is a Bad Idea. It's by Suzanne Gordon.
Yeah, it's a fantastic piece, and it's something that we're always going to keep touching back on until the veterans get treated better. Obviously, it's something that we can continue to hark on. These guys it's a joke at this point. Somebody's got to do something for the veterans.
There's some great people there, some great opportunities, some great services, but it's totally a joke.
It is totally a joke. Man, there it is. There's the music.
Unbelievable, man. We had a lot of fun today. Powerful topics.
Yeah, these are great topics. If you liked our topics, you liked what we were talking about, or if you didn't, please send us an email or comment on our social media. You can go to Facebook, Twitter, Paleo Radio Show.
You're bumping again this weekend, dude.
Yeah, I'm going to be at the Bob here in Grand Rapids this Sunday, March 20th at 7 p.m. It's going to be fantastic for Laugh Fest. Please, if you're in Grand Rapids, make it out there.
You got to make it out, folks. He's hilarious. And one last reminder, go to TeamTinyDancer.com. It's totally dope.
Thank you guys for listening. We will see you next week.
You've been listening to Paleo Radio, exclusively with Secular Media Group.